The sprawling silence of David Hayes's minimalist penthouse, perched atop one of Manhattan's most iconic skyscrapers, was a deliberate choice, a meticulously crafted counterpoint to the relentless, cacophonous hum of the global tech empire he commanded. At 42, David carried himself with an almost unsettling calm, a quiet dignity that belied the cutthroat world in which he operated. He was a self-made man, the visionary founder and CEO of Apex Innovations, a company that had, in just over a decade, not merely rewritten the rules of software development and artificial intelligence, but had dictated them. His success was colossal, measured in billions, his influence far-reaching, capable of shifting markets with a single, strategic pronouncement. Yet despite this immense power and wealth, David remained profoundly unostentatious, almost ascetic in his personal life. His bespoke suits, exquisitely tailored and reserved for the highest echelons of corporate negotiation, were replaced in his private hours by simple, well-worn jeans, plain cashmere sweaters, and comfortable, unbranded sneakers. He drove a modest electric sedan, not a flashy sports car. His fortune was not a badge to be displayed, nor a toy to be indulged in. It was a resource, a potent tool, primarily channeled into ventures that sought to uplift, rather than merely acquire. Indeed, the true measure of his prosperity, in his own estimation, lay in the substantial, often anonymous contributions he made to scholarship funds for underserved students in inner-city communities, and meticulously designed mentorship programs for budding entrepreneurs from marginalized backgrounds. He believed, with an almost zealous conviction, that opportunity was a fundamental right, not a privilege, and that equitable access to education and guidance could dismantle societal barriers far more effectively and profoundly than any overt display of personal power. His mornings unfolded with a precise, almost meditative rhythm that had remained unchanged for years, a psychological bulwark against the inherent chaos and relentless demands of managing a multi-billion-dollar enterprise. Before the city stirred, before the first tentative golden rays of dawn kissed the polished glass facades of the skyscrapers below, David would be in his private, exquisitely equipped gym. He trained alone, his movements a fluid, almost meditative dance of advanced calisthenics, classical yoga sequences, and disciplined shadowboxing routines. There were no blaring motivational anthems echoing through the soundproofed space, no personal trainers barking orders or pushing him to artificial limits. Just the soft, rhythmic whisper of his own breathing, the quiet stretch of muscle, the focused, almost spiritual communion of mind and body. He wasn't building a physique for magazine covers or public admiration. He was forging resilience, maintaining the quiet internal strength and mental fortitude that had carried him through countless battles, both corporate and deeply personal. His body, lean and powerfully compact, moved with an economy of motion that hinted at a deeper, almost instinctual understanding of physical presence and controlled energy. After his rigorous hour-long regimen, the invigorating aroma of freshly ground artisanal coffee would fill the expansive, starkly modern kitchen. He meticulously prepared it himself, eschewing the convenience of automated machines, savoring the ritual, the simple, tangible act of creation that grounded him. With a steaming ceramic mug in hand, he would settle by the floor-to-ceiling windows, not to gaze idly at the burgeoning empire spread beneath him, but to immerse himself in the digital currents of global news, absorbing information with rapid precision, identifying emerging trends, and seeking a deeper understanding in a complex world he strove to improve, rather than merely conquer. This disciplined solitude was his sanctuary, a crucial element in maintaining his equilibrium amidst the relentless, dizzying demands of his public persona. A deliberate choice for groundedness amidst the dizzying heights of his success. On this particular Tuesday, however, a subtle, almost imperceptible undercurrent of heightened anticipation vibrated beneath the surface of his calm, predictable routine. Today was the day. He had a meticulously scheduled flight to London, a pivotal trip to finalize a multi-billion-dollar contract with a major European consortium that promised to catapult Apex Innovations into an entirely new stratosphere, potentially revolutionizing a key sector of the global economy through a groundbreaking AI integration. This wasn't merely a business deal. It was the culmination of years of relentless effort, countless sleepless nights, and an unwavering, almost messianic belief in his singular vision. He dressed carefully for the transatlantic journey, choosing a dark, perfectly tailored but discreetly unbranded travel suit that blended seamlessly into the anonymous sophistication of first-class travel, valuing comfort, discretion, and the seamless fluidity of movement above all else. His executive assistant, Sarah, a sharp, impeccably efficient woman in her early 30s, who had been with him since Apex Innovation's lean startup days, had handled every minute detail of the itinerary. She was more than an assistant. She was a trusted confidant, an extension of his own meticulous planning, understanding his preferences and anticipating his needs with almost prescient accuracy, a silent, indispensable force behind his public achievements. As his sleek, whisper-quiet electric sedan glided through the pre-rush hour streets towards the international airport, the city began to awaken around them, a gradual symphony of accelerating engines, distant sirens, and the first tentative stirrings of urban life. Just a few blocks from the terminal entrance, however, the seamless flow of traffic abruptly congealed into a frustrating, unyielding gridlock. Ahead, on the shoulder of the sprawling multi-lane highway, a battered, aging sedan listed precariously, its front passenger side tire completely shredded, the pathetic remnants of rubber clinging desperately to the metallic rim. A young woman, her face streaked with tears and palpable frustration, paced frantically beside the disabled vehicle, her distraught gestures speaking volumes of her overwhelming distress. She fumbled clumsily with a jack, clearly distraught and completely overwhelmed by the mechanical mishap, her exhaustion almost radiating from her small frame. David glanced at the expensive but understated watch on his wrist. His flight schedule was meticulously planned, every minute accounted for, every contingency theoretically prepared for. Missing his departure window, even by a few minutes, could create a cascading ripple effect, potentially jeopardizing the London deal. A complex negotiation sensitive to even minor delays. His chauffeur, Robert, a dignified older man with a long-standing history of impeccable service, trained for surgical punctuality, instinctively began to navigate around the stalled vehicle, prioritizing the CEO's critical itinerary, his focus unwavering. But David's gaze remained fixed on the young woman. He saw not just a stranded motorist, an inconvenient obstruction, but a vivid, almost painful reflection of his own past struggles, the myriad times he had faced seemingly insurmountable obstacles with no one to offer a guiding hand, no one to turn to. He remembered the grinding fear of poverty that had defined his early life, the crushing weight of responsibility that had fallen on his young shoulders, the moments when a single, unexpected setback could unravel weeks of painstaking, desperate effort. His personal philosophy, deeply ingrained and fiercely held, forged in the fires of adversity, surged to the forefront of his mind. True success was never truly measured by the accumulation of wealth or power, by the number of zeros in a bank account, but by the quiet, often unseen acts of compassion and empowerment, especially when no external reward was expected, when no cameras were rolling, when no one but the recipient would know. "Pull over, Robert," he instructed his chauffeur, his voice calm but firm, leaving absolutely no room for argument or hesitation. Robert, momentarily surprised by the unexpected deviation from protocol, expertly pulled the luxurious sedan to the side of the road, a few car lengths behind the disabled vehicle. David, without a word, exited the car, his expensive suit jacket momentarily out of place against the backdrop of an emergency shoulder, the light drizzle already beginning to mist his impeccably styled hair. He opened the trunk, retrieved a high-visibility rain poncho, and pulled it over his suit. He then approached the distressed woman, his presence radiating a quiet competence, a calm, reassuring assurance that immediately drew her startled gaze. "Everything all right?" he asked gently, his tone devoid of judgment, his eyes empathetic, reflecting a genuine concern. The woman, startled, looked up, her eyes wide with a mixture of surprise, desperation, and a flicker of disbelief that such a well-dressed man would stop. "My tire. I don't know what to do. I'm going to be so late for work, and I can't afford a tow truck right now, not on top of everything else." Her voice cracked, on the very verge of breaking into desperate sobs, her exhaustion and despair palpable. Without a further word, Marcus knelt beside the car. His hands, usually manipulating complex lines of code and navigating intricate touchscreens with practiced ease, now worked with a familiar, almost instinctive dexterity. He quickly assessed the situation, located the spare tire in the trunk, and within minutes had the damaged wheel off and the new one precisely bolted into place. There was no fuss, no wasted motion, just the efficient, quiet precision of a man who knew how to solve problems, whether they were lines of code, complex algorithms, or the mundane, immediate challenge of a flat tire. He declined her effusive, tearful thanks, her fervent offers of meager payment, with a simple, reassuring shake of his head and a warm, genuine smile that softened his usually stern features. "Just pay it forward," he advised softly, his voice barely above a whisper, echoing a life lesson he himself had learned years ago. Then, with a quiet nod, he re-entered his car, leaving the woman astonished, immensely relieved, and perhaps, subtly, profoundly inspired by the unexpected kindness from a stranger. He was only a few minutes behind schedule, a negligible delay in the grand scheme of his day, but his conscience was clear, his spirit replenished by the simple, fundamental act of human connection and quiet compassion. No one else on that busy highway had stopped. No one else had witnessed this quiet act of humanity, this fleeting ripple in the vast, indifferent ocean of urban life. But to David, it was a fundamental affirmation of his values, a grounding reminder of who he truly was beneath the layers of wealth and success. Yet subtle details, often unnoticed by the casual observer, hinted at a deeper narrative within David Hayes, a story far richer and more complex than his public persona as a tech titan. As he settled back into the luxurious comfort of his sedan, the scent of damp wool from his poncho mingling faintly with the expensive leather of the interior, he absently touched the face of the wristwatch on his left wrist. It was an old timepiece, its face unadorned, devoid of any discernible brand, its simple leather strap worn smooth and supple with age, a stark contrast to the sleek, smart devices he designed. It held no intrinsic monetary value in the traditional sense, yet David often found himself gently tracing its contours, particularly when lost in profound thought or moments of quiet, vulnerable reflection. It was more than a relic. It was a silent testament to a journey, a cherished, tangible link to a past far humbler than his glittering present, a constant anchor to his origins. A few, very few of his closest confidants, and perhaps his personal physician, had noticed a small, almost imperceptible scar near his left temple, partially hidden by his meticulously styled hair. It was a faint physical reminder of a past trauma or a life-altering event that few people knew about, a subtle hint of battles fought and survived. And then, there was the old tarnished silver locket he wore on a simple worn chain under his shirt, usually hidden beneath his collar or tie, a stark contrast to his expensive watches and minimalist aesthetic. The locket contained a faded, almost indistinguishable photo, its details blurred by time and touch. He sometimes traced its cold metal surface, his fingers feeling the slight indentations, a ritualistic gesture that spoke of a deep, unaddressed emotional reservoir. This collection of subtle, almost invisible details hinted at a deeper, more emotional past, a profound secret that predated his current wealth and status, possibly related to the enigmatic ex-wife mentioned in the title. This secret, like the phoenix tattoo on Marcus Thorne's wrist in other stories, was a symbol of his untold history, a silent promise of battles fought and passions buried, waiting for the right moment to resurface. The quiet calm he exuded was not a lack of passion, but the profound stillness of a soul shaped by fire, waiting for the right catalyst to ignite. The polished marble floors of the international terminal hummed with the quiet, perpetual urgency of global travel. The air, crisp and conditioned, carried the subtle scent of jet fuel and the mingled anticipation of hurried departures and joyful arrivals. David Hayes, his bespoke travel suit, a dark, unassuming silhouette amidst the brighter hues of vacationers and the more casual attire of leisure travelers, approached the first-class check-in counter. His carry-on, a sleek, minimalist bag designed for maximum efficiency, rested easily on his shoulder, a silent testament to his preference for unencumbered movement. His mind, however, was already a continent away, consumed by the intricate details of the multi-billion-dollar deal awaiting his signature in London. A deal that promised to redefine Apex Innovation's trajectory for the next decade. The contract was not merely a financial triumph, it represented a profound leap forward for his company, the culmination of years of relentless innovation, strategic foresight, and David's unwavering belief in the transformative power of technology. He presented his passport and the digital confirmation of his first-class ticket to the airline attendant, a woman named Brenda. Her perfectly coiffed blonde hair and meticulously applied makeup did little to mask the subtle tension in her jawline, or the weary impatience in her eyes. Brenda, a veteran airline employee, harbored a deep-seated and often unchallenged prejudice, a rigid mental framework that instinctively categorized passengers at a glance. In her estimation, first-class passengers adhered to a specific, unspoken dress code, one of overt designer labels, flashy accessories, and an air of unquestionable inherited affluence. David, with his understated elegance, his quiet demeanor, and his focus on functionality rather than ostentation, simply didn't fit her narrow, prejudiced mold. He exuded power, yes, but it was a quiet, almost invisible power, easily missed by those who judged by superficialities and rigid stereotypes. Brenda was a classic misunderstood antagonist, Type B. Her actions stemmed not from overt, premeditated malice, but from deeply ingrained biases, a narrow worldview shaped by years of observing the elite, and the petty satisfaction of wielding what little authority she possessed over those she perceived as lesser, or simply out of place. Her expression soured almost imperceptibly as her eyes skimmed his attire, then narrowed slightly as she scanned his digital ticket confirmation. "There seems to be an issue here, sir," Brenda announced, her voice clipped, devoid of the usual welcoming pleasantries typically reserved for first-class patrons. A tiny, almost imperceptible hint of smug satisfaction flickered in her eyes, betraying a sense of gratification. "Your seat appears to be overbooked. You'll have to take a seat in economy." She slid his passport and a generic boarding pass for an economy seat across the counter with a curt, dismissive gesture, not even bothering to offer an apology or any alternative solution. The implicit message, unspoken but powerfully conveyed, was clear. "You don't belong here. This class isn't for you." David felt the familiar, unwelcome stir of irritation, a cold ember igniting in the pit of his stomach. He had navigated the labyrinthine corridors of corporate America as a black man for decades, facing countless microaggressions, subtle slights, and thinly veiled prejudices. Usually, these were fleeting, easily dismissed as the background noise of systemic bias, a tiresome but manageable part of his daily life. This, however, was blatant, an overt act of dismissiveness that grated on his carefully cultivated composure. He maintained his outward calm, his voice a steady, controlled counterpoint to Brenda's brittle impatience and underlying disdain. "Overbooked? That's impossible. I booked this seat weeks ago through a premium travel agency, and it was confirmed." He reached into his wallet and produced his airline's top-tier Platinum Elite member card, its metallic sheen glinting under the harsh terminal lights, a silent, irrefutable testament to his extensive travel history and unwavering loyalty to the airline. "Could you please recheck the system, perhaps manually? My flight is crucial. I have a time-sensitive, critical business meeting in London that cannot be rescheduled." Brenda merely scoffed, a tiny, almost inaudible sound of derision that nonetheless vibrated with contempt. She barely glanced at the platinum card, dismissing it as if it were a cheap novelty, a transparent attempt by someone trying to punch above their weight. "Sir, I assure you, the system is always correct. First class is full. Perhaps you should have arrived earlier if your flight was so crucial," she retorted, her tone dripping with unconcealed sarcasm. Her eyes raked over his humble clothes once more, lingering on the worn leather of his travel bag, a silent judgment. "These seats," she began, lowering her voice conspiratorially, as if sharing an insider secret with an invisible, appreciative audience, "are for established clientele, for those who truly belong here, for those whose presence is expected and celebrated, not for last-minute upgrades or those who might misunderstand their booking status." She left no doubt that she believed he didn't fit the profile of a legitimate first-class passenger, that his presence was an inconvenience, if not an outright affront to the social order she meticulously maintained. Just then, a sleek, immaculately dressed figure approached the counter directly behind Marcus, a predatory smirk playing on his lips. This was Kevin Miller, the cunning and ruthless CEO of Horizon Labs, a direct, often cutthroat competitor to Apex Innovations. Kevin had been observing David from the moment he'd entered the terminal, a silent, envious shadow, acutely aware of David's meteoric rise, and more importantly, the multi-billion-dollar London deal hanging precariously in the balance, a deal Kevin himself had aggressively and unsuccessfully pursued for months. He seized this opportune moment to inject himself into David's perceived humiliation, to twist the knife and revel in his rival's discomfort. "Having trouble, Hayes?" Kevin drawled, his voice oily with feigned concern, though his eyes gleamed with undisguised malicious amusement. He then turned to Brenda, flashing a charming conspiratorial smile that was almost unsettling in its insincerity. "Don't worry, ma'am. I'm sure he just made a little mistake. First class isn't for just anyone," he added, his gaze flicking back to David with a condescending sneer, emphasizing the word anyone with a loaded, discriminatory implication. Kevin was a classic antagonist. Type A. His actions were driven by a corrosive envy, a ruthless desire to undermine his rivals at any cost, and a pathological need to assert his own superiority, especially in public forums. He knew exactly who David Hayes was, and he reveled in this unexpected opportunity to diminish him, to paint him as an imposter, regardless of his actual status or accomplishments. He saw an opening to destabilize his competitor before the critical London negotiation. A cold, precise anger began to simmer within David. He felt the familiar burning surge of righteous indignation, the bitter, acrid taste of being judged solely on superficialities, of having his rightful place denied purely on the basis of someone else's prejudice. But years of navigating the cutthroat currents of corporate America, of enduring insidious discrimination and subtle sabotage, had taught him an almost superhuman restraint. He knew immediate emotional outbursts were a weakness, a concession to the very prejudices he sought to dismantle, an admission of defeat. He simply met Kevin's gaze with an unblinking stare that held far more quiet steel than overt anger, a look that promised a reckoning, a silent challenge that unsettled Kevin despite his bravado. He then turned back to Brenda, his voice dropping to a dangerously low, controlled tone, each syllable articulated with chilling clarity. "I will ask you one last time politely to verify my reservation. I have a confirmed first-class ticket, Platinum Elite status, and I expect to be seated as such. My time is extremely valuable, and any further delay will have significant consequences for both me and, I assure you, for this airline. This is not a request. It's an expectation based on a confirmed contract." Brenda, however, was too far gone in her self-righteousness, too emboldened by Kevin's presence and her own entrenched prejudice to heed the subtle warning in David's voice. She merely crossed her arms, her chin held high, her lips pressed into a thin, unyielding line of defiance. "Sir, there's nothing more to discuss. The seat is full. You can take the economy seat offered, or you don't fly. I have other passengers waiting." Her finality was absolute, dripping with the petty satisfaction of having, in her distorted perception, definitively put this unsuitable man in his place, of having reinforced her own rigid sense of order and hierarchy within the airline's system. She believed she had won a small victory, unaware of the storm she had just unleashed. In that precise, loaded moment, a profound and undeniable realization washed over David. This wasn't just a simple logistical inconvenience. It was a deliberate, malicious act of discrimination, tacitly encouraged by a ruthless competitor and executed with venom by a prejudiced employee. It was a calculated affront to his dignity, a blatant disrespect for his hard-won status, and a direct, immediate threat to his crucial London deal. The multi-billion-dollar contract, the culmination of years of tireless work, the very future of Apex Innovations, now hung precariously in the balance, jeopardized by a petty act of bigotry and corporate sabotage. But it was more than just the contract. It was the crushing echo of every dismissive glance, every condescending tone, every subtle, insidious barrier he had faced as a black man rising through the ostensibly meritocratic ranks of an often exclusive industry. He had overcome so much, built so much, pushed through so many invisible walls of prejudice, only to be reduced to this, to be denied what was rightfully his by a bigoted gatekeeper and a conniving rival. The frustration of years of similar encounters, meticulously suppressed and compartmentalized, finally boiled over, reaching a critical, explosive point within him. This was the point of no return. The casual injustice, the open contempt, the deliberate attempt to sabotage his critical business had pushed him past his limit. To simply accept this, to retreat into the anonymity of the economy cabin, would be to betray not just his own hard-won standing, but the very principles of equity, justice, and self-respect that he championed, that he subtly encouraged in others through his philanthropic endeavors. It would be a surrender not just to Brenda's petty power, but to every prejudiced glance, every condescending remark, every systemic barrier he had ever faced in his life. He would not allow this blatant prejudice to stand, not when it threatened his mission and insulted his very being. He would not just respond. He would act, decisively, strategically, and with the full, formidable weight of his accumulated influence, a power Brenda and Kevin could not even begin to fathom. The time for quiet diplomacy, for patient endurance, for silent suffering of injustice was definitively over. The game had changed, and David Hayes, the man of quiet strength, the man with the scar and the hidden locket, was ready to play it on his own, unyielding terms. The storm had broken, and David was its eye, preparing to unleash its full force. The charged atmosphere at the first-class check-in counter crackled with Brenda's smug, unwavering conviction and Kevin Miller's thinly veiled predatory malice. They stood, a silent, unholy alliance of prejudice and corporate ambition, fully expecting David's frustrated retreat, a defeated figure vanishing into the sprawling anonymity of the economy cabin. Their smiles, carefully constructed facades of self-satisfaction and superiority, remained fixed. But David Hayes was not a man who retreated. The quiet anger that had simmered beneath his composed exterior, the cold ember of indignation now solidified into a diamond-hard resolve, cutting through the terminal's ambient hum with an almost physical force. His gaze, devoid of overt rage but chilling in its intensity, swept from Brenda's insolent smirk to Kevin's preening face, conveying a silent, unshakable promise of consequences that neither of them could yet fully comprehend. They believed they held the power in this situation, but David knew, with absolute certainty, that they were gravely mistaken. He didn't argue further. He didn't raise his voice, a testament to years of disciplined self-control honed in countless high-stakes boardrooms and through a lifetime of personal battles against unseen adversaries. Instead, with a deliberate, almost theatrical slowness that drew every curious eye in the immediate vicinity, David reached into the inner pocket of his perfectly tailored suit jacket. He retrieved his phone, a sleek, minimalist device that seemed to hum with latent power, a quiet sentinel of global connectivity, a direct line to his vast network. His fingers, accustomed to navigating complex digital interfaces and orchestrating multi-billion-dollar deals, moved with practiced precision, tapping through contacts, bypassing the usual pleasantries and standard corporate channels. He raised the phone to his ear, slowly turning his back slightly to the counter, effectively dismissing Brenda and Kevin, a deliberate gesture of profound, almost contemptuous disdain that stung far more than any shouted reprimand. The subtle insult was lost on no one. The silence in the immediate vicinity deepened, growing taut, broken only by the low murmur of distant conversations and the muffled routine announcements over the airport's PA system. Every eye, from the weary travelers to the bustling ground staff, was now fixed on David Hayes, sensing a drama far beyond a simple customer complaint. "Sarah," David's voice was calm, almost conversational, yet it carried an unmistakable, resonant edge of unwavering command that cut through the background noise, reaching Brenda and Kevin with chilling clarity, each word landing like a calculated blow. "Cancel this flight, immediately, and arrange the private jet. I want it ready to depart from the executive hangar for London in 30 minutes. Confirm the landing slot and ground transport details with my contacts in the UK. My meeting is non-negotiable, and I will not tolerate any further delays." He paused, allowing a beat of loaded silence that stretched like taut wire, amplifying the gravity of his words. "Also, I need an immediate, unscheduled meeting with the highest level of this airline's executive leadership, as soon as humanly possible. Make it happen, Sarah. Do whatever is necessary." The sheer audacity of the demand, delivered with such quiet authority, was breathtaking. He clicked the phone shut, the decisive snap echoing in the sudden, profound stillness of the terminal. He didn't spare Brenda another glance, turning instead towards the exclusive, discreetly marked entrance to the executive lounges, as if the entire interaction with her was now entirely beneath his consideration, already a closed chapter in his mind, something trivial to be discarded. He moved with a quiet, unhurried purpose, every step radiating the effortless confidence of a man fully in control, leaving a vacuum of stunned silence in his wake. Brenda's composure completely shattered. Her perfectly made-up face, moments ago smug with petty authority and a sense of triumph, now drained of all color, turning a sickly, mottled white that clashed horribly with her bright lipstick. The horrifying realization, cold and stark, hit her with the force of a physical blow. She had not merely insulted an ordinary passenger or a moderately wealthy businessman. She had irrevocably offended someone of immense, unseen, and undeniable power, someone who commanded private jets with a mere phone call and summoned airline executives like obedient servants. Her carefully constructed worldview, where she held arbitrary sway over the fleeting lives of passengers, where her judgment was supreme, crumbled into dust around her. Panic, raw and unadulterated, flared in her eyes. "Sir, Mr. Hayes, please wait," she stammered, abandoning all pretense of professionalism, her voice thick with desperate apology, bordering on a pathetic whine. I can recheck. I'm sure we can find something for you. Perhaps an upgrade. A different flight right away. Please, sir, let me fix this." She made a fumbling, desperate gesture towards her computer, her hands trembling uncontrollably, her face a mask of abject fear. The image of arrogant authority she had projected moments ago was completely dissipated, replaced by naked terror. David simply looked over his shoulder, his eyes meeting hers for a fleeting moment. It was a silent, withering gaze that conveyed utter dismissal, a profound rejection of her belated, self-serving offer. "Too late, Brenda," he stated, his voice flat, devoid of emotion, a final, definitive judgment that left no room for appeal. He then continued his walk, leaving Brenda paralyzed by the horrifying magnitude of her blunder, her career, her very future, now hanging by a thread of her own making, irrevocably shredded by her own prejudiced actions. She stood frozen, a statue of regret, as the full weight of her catastrophic error settled upon her. Kevin Miller, witnessing the entire, humiliating exchange, felt a cold dread creep into his stomach, slowly constricting his chest, making it difficult to breathe. His initial amusement, his self-satisfied smirk at David's perceived downfall, had completely curdled into genuine alarm, then a growing icy fear that chilled him to the bone. Private jet, executive leadership, immediate meeting. He muttered the words under his breath, his mind racing frantically, desperately trying to reconcile the unassuming man in front of him with the seismic implications of his phone call. He knew David Hayes was successful, immensely so, a formidable competitor, but a private jet on 30 minutes' notice, and direct, immediate, unquestioned access to airline CEOs. This was a level of influence far, far beyond even his own considerable reach and carefully cultivated network. The man he had just publicly mocked, the rival he sought to undermine, was clearly not just a formidable competitor, but a force of nature, an entity whose power he had catastrophically underestimated. The smugness drained from his face, replaced by a calculating, desperate worry that twisted his features. He had seen David's name in Forbes, heard the dizzying valuations of Apex Innovations, but now he realized the terrifying depth of the iceberg beneath the visible surface. He was facing a true legend returned, a man whose quiet power had been so profoundly, dangerously underestimated, and whose return to the foreground of the industry, fueled by righteous anger, would send unimaginable shockwaves through every corner of their competitive landscape. Kevin immediately pulled out his own phone, but instead of making a call, he began frantically typing, accessing his vast network of clandestine contacts within the airline and the broader industry. He wasn't trying to resolve anything for David. He was attempting, with desperate urgency, to glean any last-minute information he could about David Hayes's true standing with the airline, or more nefariously, to plant seeds of doubt. He frantically messaged his inside sources, discreetly inquiring about the looming executive meeting, attempting to undermine David's credibility even before the meeting began, hoping to paint him as an overzealous, litigious troublemaker, a man prone to irrational outbursts. He feared David would use his newfound undeniable leverage not just to address the discrimination, but to potentially damage Kevin's own business interests, perhaps by revealing his involvement in the incident. He was the quintessential antagonist, Type A, now consumed not just by envy and corporate greed, but by a growing, desperate, all-consuming fear for his own survival. His primary objective had abruptly shifted from humiliating David to protecting himself from the unforeseen, cataclysmic consequences of his own arrogance and short-sighted malice. He plotted, even as the cold tendrils of panic began to tighten their grip on his once unshakable composure, the weight of his own culpability pressing down. Brenda, meanwhile, still frozen at the check-in counter, frantically tried to cover her tracks, deleting entries from her digital log, attempting to rewrite the narrative of her discriminatory actions, utterly oblivious to the fact that the digital breadcrumbs of her malicious deeds, meticulously monitored by Apex Innovations' sophisticated systems, had already been laid, irrefutable and indelible. Her desperate attempts at damage control were futile. The digital record was already sealed. David, however, was already several steps ahead, his mind a finely tuned instrument of strategy, not merely reactive emotion. As he walked towards the exclusive executive lounges, his mind was a whirlwind of strategic planning, not emotional reactivity. He knew the London deal was paramount, the financial future of Apex Innovations depending on its successful execution. But equally paramount, perhaps even more so, was the underlying principle. He had faced adversity his entire life, climbed against invisible currents of bias and prejudice. But this blatant, targeted act of discrimination, tacitly encouraged by a rival, was a line that had been definitively, irrevocably crossed. This was no longer just about a missed flight or a personal insult. It was about sending a clear, unequivocal message to an entire industry, to the world, that discrimination in any form would not be tolerated, especially not when wielded by those in positions of power, nor when subtly instigated by malicious competitors seeking to gain an unfair advantage. His personal assistant, Sarah, his indispensable helper, was already at work, a flurry of precise, silent efficiency. She was the only person, perhaps in the entire world, who truly understood the full depth of his capabilities, the relentless drive beneath his calm exterior, and his unwavering, almost zealous commitment to justice. Even as David walked, seemingly unconcerned, Sarah was already compiling the unassailable arsenal of evidence, meticulously pulling up airport security footage from various angles, accessing granular digital records of his original first-class booking confirmation, cross-referencing airline seat availability logs, and building an irrefutable ironclad case that would leave no room for doubt or deflection. Marcus trusted her implicitly. Her loyalty was absolute, her competence unparalleled, her dedication to his vision unwavering. He knew that what had just transpired at the check-in counter, while a public spectacle, was merely the first volley in a much larger, more significant confrontation. The real battle, against systemic prejudice and individual malice, against the very fabric of discrimination woven into corporate culture, was about to begin. The calm exterior he presented to the world belied the sharp, strategic mind, already calculating his next decisive move, envisioning the complete dismantling of the structures that allowed such injustices to persist. The legend had not just unveiled himself. He had set the stage for a reckoning, a profound rebalancing of power that would ripple far beyond the confines of this airport. The plush, silent confines of the airline's executive boardroom, typically a sanctuary of hushed power plays and strategic pronouncements, now hummed with a brittle, almost palpable tension. This was the tournament David Hayes had demanded, a symbolic arena where the casual prejudice of an airline employee and the insidious machinations of a corporate rival would confront the unyielding, quiet power of a man who refused to be disrespected. The gleaming glass table, reflecting the stern, increasingly anxious faces of the assembled executives, seemed to amplify the unspoken stakes of the looming confrontation. At its head sat David Thompson, the airline's CEO, a man whose carefully composed demeanor, usually a testament to years of navigating corporate crises, now betrayed a faint tremor of unease. Flanking him were Eleanor Vance, the grim-faced chief operations officer, her sharp, analytical eyes missing nothing, and Robert Sterling, the head of customer relations, a man whose perpetually plastered-on smile now looked more like a desperate grimace. And there, tucked almost apologetically into a chair at the far end of the table, was Brenda, her face a ghostly pale, her eyes darting nervously between David and her superiors, clinging to a desperate, rapidly fading hope for absolution. David, however, was fundamentally alone in this confrontation. Sarah, his indispensable personal assistant and unwavering helper, was a silent force working remotely, her fingers flying across keyboards, meticulously compiling the digital breadcrumbs, preparing the final, decisive arsenal of evidence David would wield. She was a master of information retrieval, capable of sifting through vast databases, cross-referencing disparate systems, and piecing together fragmented data with remarkable speed and precision, a digital Sherlock Holmes working in the background. But it was David who had to physically present the case, who had to articulate the profound insult, dissect the injustice, and compel a room full of powerful, skeptical individuals to not only acknowledge an uncomfortable, ugly truth within their own meticulously curated organization, but also to act upon it with swift, undeniable consequence. He was acutely aware of the relentless ticking clock. His London deal, the multi-billion-dollar linchpin for Apex Innovation's next phase of global expansion, hung precariously in the balance. Every passing minute of delay, every evasive maneuver or attempt at deflection from the airline executives was a direct threat to his global aspirations, a subtle erosion of the carefully constructed future he envisioned. The financial stakes were immense, unfathomable to most. But for David, the stakes of integrity, personal dignity, and fundamental justice were far, far higher. David Thompson, attempting to project an air of calm control that was rapidly unraveling, cleared his throat, his voice smooth, practiced, honed by countless public appearances and crisis management sessions. "Mr. Hayes, thank you for coming on such short notice. We understand there was an unfortunate misunderstanding at check-in. Our staff are trained to the highest standards, and we pride ourselves on exceptional customer service and inclusivity. Perhaps a generous voucher for future first-class travel or a full refund for your ticket might help resolve this matter to your satisfaction. We value our elite customers, and we certainly don't want any disgruntled feedback." His tone was carefully conciliatory, designed to diffuse the tension, to placate, to sweep the entire unsavory incident under the opulent rug of corporate apology with a minimum of fuss and maximum speed. Robert Sterling nodded sagely, his sympathetic but ultimately dismissive smile fixed on his face, mirroring Thompson's sentiment, a silent endorsement of the proposed quick fix. Eleanor Vance remained impassive, her gaze shrewd, assessing David with a cold, almost detached scrutiny, trying to gauge the true depth of his resolve. Brenda, sensing a faint lifeline, a desperate, slender opportunity to perhaps escape culpability and salvage her career, spoke up, her voice trembling slightly, but laced with a subtle, desperate defensiveness. "It was just a system error, Mr. Thompson. The seat was clearly showing as unavailable. An unexpected glitch. I simply followed procedure, sir." Her eyes flickered nervously to David, a silent, desperate plea for him to let it go, to accept the easy out, to allow them all to move on. Perhaps Mr. Hayes simply arrived too late to claim his seat. These things happen in busy airports, after all. There are often unforeseen technical glitches, especially with last-minute bookings. A few of the less senior executives, eager to protect one of their own and dismiss the uncomfortable implications of the situation, murmured their agreement, casting fleeting critical glances at David, clearly viewing him as an overreacting, demanding passenger, perhaps even an opportunistic one looking for a payout. David listened patiently, his expression utterly unreadable, a stone-cold mask of composure. He allowed their practiced excuses, their carefully worded deflections, their thinly veiled attempts at gaslighting, to hang in the air, knowing they were merely setting the stage for his meticulously planned counterattack. He knew, with absolute certainty that Kevin Miller, his ruthless rival, was also likely at work behind the scenes, leveraging his own illicit connections, whispering doubts about David's character, attempting to paint him as an overly aggressive businessman looking for an excuse to cause trouble, to gain an unfair competitive advantage. The subtle undercurrent of skepticism and thinly veiled hostility emanating from some of the less informed executives confirmed his suspicion. This wasn't just about Brenda's individual prejudice. It was about the insidious corporate culture she represented and the pervasive, undermining influence of a malicious competitor operating in the shadows. The battle was not just for a seat, but for his reputation, for the London deal, and for the very principle of justice that underpinned his personal and professional life. This was a battle for respect, not just for himself, but for every individual who had ever faced similar discrimination. "With all due respect, Mr. Thompson," David finally interjected, his voice calm but firm, a razor-sharp blade cutting through their carefully constructed narrative of misunderstanding. This was no misunderstanding, and it was certainly not a system error. It was a deliberate act of discrimination, compounded by an utter lack of professionalism, and indeed a clear attempt at corporate sabotage orchestrated by one of your own employees at the behest of a direct competitor. He paused, allowing the searing gravity of his words to sink in, challenging their comfortable assumptions, forcing them to confront an unpleasant, inconvenient reality within their gilded walls. And it was fueled by explicit prejudice and a rival's malicious intent to undermine my company's critical international negotiations. The atmosphere in the room visibly stiffened, growing taut with escalating tension. The word discrimination hung heavy in the air, an unwelcome, toxic intruder in their pristine corporate bubble. David Thompson's carefully maintained smile faltered completely, replaced by a deep furrow in his brow, a visible sign of mounting anxiety. Robert Sterling shifted uncomfortably in his expensive chair, his attempts at composure crumbling. Eleanor Vance's gaze sharpened dramatically, her eyes now fixed intently, almost predatory, on David, assessing not just his words, but the unwavering, almost chilling conviction behind them. She sensed an iceberg lurking beneath the placid surface. "Mr. Hayes, that's a very serious accusation," Thompson said, his tone now tinged with a distinct warning, a subtle threat of legal repercussion. "Do you have any concrete proof of this deliberate act and the direct involvement of a competitor? Our legal team will require substantial, irrefutable evidence if you intend to pursue such damaging claims against our reputable airline." He clearly expected a rant, a frustrated outburst, something he could easily dismiss as a disgruntled customer's hyperbole, or a legal bluff designed to extract a larger settlement. He was trying to call David's hand, to force him to overplay his position, to show weakness. This was David's ultimate test. He knew the London deal was precariously balanced, hanging by a thread of time and trust, a delicate negotiation that could unravel at any moment. He needed to be swift, decisive, and irrefutable. He couldn't afford a protracted debate, a legal quagmire, or a messy PR battle that could inadvertently damage Apex Innovation's carefully cultivated reputation for integrity and efficiency. He reached for his sleek, slim tablet, which he had placed silently on the polished glass table before the meeting began, its dark screen now a mirror reflecting the anxious, expectant faces around him. "As a matter of fact, Mr. Thompson," David countered, his voice steady, unwavering, carrying an undeniable weight of quiet, authoritative conviction. "I do." His fingers moved across the tablet's screen, precise and confident, a master technician preparing a complex, devastating presentation. "Firstly, here is the official confirmation from my premium travel agency, dated 3 weeks ago, showing a meticulously confirmed first-class booking for this specific flight. There was no overbooking on record at that time, as Ms. Brenda falsely claimed. The seat was, unequivocally, available and reserved for me." He displayed the email confirmation, its details stark, clear, and unassailable, projected onto the large screen at the front of the boardroom, filling the room with the undeniable truth. "Secondly," David continued, his voice maintaining its controlled, almost mesmerizing rhythm, building the case brick by meticulous brick, "it is my personal and corporate policy to record all critical business conversations, particularly those involving sensitive interactions or potential disputes. I have an audio recording of my entire conversation with Ms. Brenda, where she explicitly refused to recheck the system, despite being shown my Platinum Elite card, and made several disparaging remarks about my appearance, my professionalism, and my suitability for first-class travel. You will hear her exact words, her contemptuous tone, her deliberate dismissiveness, all meticulously captured. He activated the audio recording. Brenda's voice, captured with chilling fidelity, filled the boardroom, her curt, contemptuous tones echoing the very prejudice David had described, leaving no room for denial. Her face, already pale, now turned an ashen white, her eyes wide with unadulterated terror as she heard her own damning words, betraying her. Thompson and Sterling exchanged horrified, panicked glances. The airline had strict internal policies against recording without consent, a minor violation in the face of the monumental legal implications of such a blatant act of discrimination, now captured in incontrovertible audio. The evidence was overwhelming. And finally, David concluded, his voice dropping to a low, powerful register, a quiet crescendo that filled the room with palpable, suffocating tension. My team, utilizing Apex Innovations' advanced data analytics and access to publicly available and cross-referenced information, was able to access the airport's comprehensive security camera footage from the check-in area. It clearly shows Ms. Brenda engaging in a brief, but highly significant and conspiratorial conversation with Mr. Kevin Miller, CEO of Horizon Labs, my direct business competitor, directly before she denied my boarding. In that conversation, Mr. Miller can be seen gesturing explicitly towards me, and Ms. Brenda can be seen nodding in what appears to be enthusiastic, malicious agreement prior to her discriminatory actions. This was not a random act of prejudice. It was a carefully orchestrated act of corporate espionage, directly intended to impede my critical business travel and sabotage the London deal. He turned the tablet to display the grainy, yet undeniably clear video feed onto the main screen, its details magnified by Apex Innovations' proprietary image enhancement software. It showed Brenda and Kevin, engaged in a conspiratorial exchange of whispers, a subtle, almost imperceptible point in David's direction from Kevin, and then Brenda's subsequent, immediate, and aggressively dismissive denial of service to David. The quiet strength of David, his unwavering gaze, and the irrefutable, multi-layered evidence he had meticulously gathered, had stripped away all their defenses, exposing the ugly, undeniable truth. The boardroom was utterly silent, save for the frantic, hammering beat of Brenda's heart. David had not merely presented a case, he had delivered a crushing, undeniable blow, exposing not just a single prejudiced employee, but a deeper, more insidious network of malice, corporate espionage, and complicity that went straight to the heart of the airline's operations. The revelation of Kevin Miller's direct, documented involvement was the final devastating piece of the puzzle, implicating not just an employee, but a rival corporation in a highly illegal act. As David pointed to the screen with a steady, unyielding hand, the slight shift of his sleeve briefly revealed the faint, almost invisible scar near his left temple, a silent testament to past battles, and the subtle glint of the old, worn silver locket beneath his shirt, symbols of his journey, his resilience, and his profound, unwavering commitment to fighting for what was right. The stage was set for the climax, and the executives knew, with chilling certainty, that their world, their carefully constructed corporate reality, was about to change irrevocably. Chapter 5. The Climax and Vindication. The executive boardroom, once a pristine fortress of corporate control and carefully managed narratives, had been utterly breached. The air, heavy with unspoken tension just moments before, now vibrated with the raw, undeniable force of David Hayes' quiet indignation and the irrefutable weight of his meticulously gathered evidence. David Thompson, the airline's CEO, his face a mask of dawning horror, remained transfixed by the tablet displaying the damning security footage. Robert Sterling's perpetually affable smile had completely vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed shock that betrayed his utter bewilderment. Eleanor Vance, the COO, ever analytical, leaned forward, her sharp eyes missing no detail, rapidly processing the full, catastrophic implications of Kevin Miller's insidious involvement. Brenda, at the far end of the polished table, whimpered, a small pathetic sound lost in the sudden, suffocating silence that had fallen over the room. She was a woman utterly broken, her petty reign of prejudice definitively ended. Marcus allowed the video to play for a full minute, a deliberate tactical choice. He wanted every executive in the room to absorb the silent, damning narrative in its entirety. Kevin Miller, David's direct business competitor, gesturing emphatically, whispering conspiratorially, and Brenda, the airline's own representative, nodding in blatant complicity before denying David his rightful seat. It was a tableau of corporate sabotage and blatant discrimination, captured with dispassionate, irrefutable clarity. The footage painted a picture that no carefully worded apology or corporate spin could ever erase. This was the Quan Kak Nin Tho, the moment of truth that would either validate David's unwavering stand or condemn him to another cycle of unspoken injustice. David Thompson, struggling desperately to regain some semblance of his executive composure, cleared his throat, his voice regaining a fraction of its former authority, though it was now tinged with a desperate, almost pleading edge. "Mr. Hayes, Mr. Thorne," he began, trying to correct his slip, attempting to salvage the crumbling situation. While this footage is undeniably concerning, it merely shows Ms. Brenda speaking with another passenger. We cannot, with all due respect, assume malicious intent from a brief interaction, however unfortunate the outcome. This still appears, from a corporate perspective, to be an isolated incident, a regrettable misunderstanding on the part of one misguided employee. The airline as a whole prides itself on diversity and inclusion, and we cannot be held responsible for the personal actions of one individual. He offered a strained, almost desperate smile, a last-ditch effort to minimize the damage, to protect the vast corporate entity from the impending fallout. He was trying to cast Brenda as a lone, misguided actor, a sacrificial lamb to absolve the company of any deeper, systemic issues. David's eyes, which had held a quiet patience and a profound understanding of human nature until now, hardened to obsidian. He knew this move, this classic corporate deflection, this transparent attempt to sacrifice the pawn to save the queen. He would not allow it. He had anticipated this exact argument, this predictable attempt to shift blame and minimize responsibility. He raised his hand, gesturing towards the tablet, his movements precise and unhurried, a conductor preparing his orchestra for a final, resounding crescendo. "Perhaps, Mr. Thompson," David countered, his voice steady, carrying an undeniable weight of quiet authority. "If this were the extent of the interaction, your argument might hold water. But it is not. This goes far beyond an isolated incident." He paused, allowing the tension to coil tighter in the room, letting the silence amplify the anticipation. Then, with a subtle, almost imperceptible flick of his wrist, a movement so precise it seemed surgical, he activated a second layer of his presentation, zooming in on a specific detail within the security footage. The camera's digital clarity, sharpened by Apex Innovations' proprietary image enhancement software, now focused with chilling precision on Brenda's hand, resting on the check-in counter. And there, with unmistakable, damning clarity, David pointed to a tablet-sized screen next to Brenda's main computer terminal, which was just visible in the corner of the frame, showing a live flight manifest. "You see this, Mr. Thompson? This is the live flight manifest, displaying real-time seat assignments. And if you look closely at the timestamp on the screen, just seconds after Ms. Brenda's conversation with Mr. Miller, you'll observe her cursor hovering directly over my name." David's voice dropped to a chillingly quiet, yet incredibly powerful crescendo, each word a hammer blow, each syllable loaded with undeniable proof. "And then, you see her deliberately changing my confirmed first-class seat assignment to canceled, even as the system, at that exact moment, clearly shows multiple available seats in the first-class cabin." This was not an overbooking. This was a malicious, intentional act. He zoomed in further, isolating the specific pixels, revealing the damning manipulation in agonizing detail. The digital trail, meticulously followed and cross-referenced by Sarah and her team, was irrefutable. Brenda had not merely claimed the seat was overbooked. She had actively, maliciously, created the overbooking by digitally altering David's reservation. It was a direct, irrefutable act of sabotage, encouraged and instigated by Kevin Miller, designed with the sole purpose of ensuring David would miss his crucial flight. The revelation hit the room like a physical shockwave. the casual, almost invisible movement of a cursor on a screen, captured on grainy security footage and then digitally enhanced, had just exposed a deep, calculated act of malice, weaving together individual prejudice and corporate espionage. As David's hand, steady and precise, pointed to the incriminating pixels, the slight, almost imperceptible shift of his sleeve revealed the faint, old scar near his left temple, and the subtle glint of the old, worn silver locket beneath his shirt, symbols of his journey, his resilience, and his profound, unwavering commitment to fighting for what was right. These personal symbols, now briefly glimpsed, seemed to underscore the depth of his character and the righteous fire that fueled him. The reaction in the room was immediate and visceral, a seismic shift in the power dynamic. David Thompson's face, already pale, turned a ghastly white, then flushed with a combination of rage and profound shame. His jaw dropped, and he slumped slightly in his chair, utterly defeated, the weight of the undeniable truth crushing him. Robert Sterling gasped, a strangled sound, his perpetual smile now replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated terror. Eleanor Vance, the seasoned COO, slammed her hand on the polished table, a sharp, decisive crack that echoed through the stunned silence. Her eyes, filled with cold professional fury, snapped to Brenda. "Brenda," she hissed, her voice low and dangerous. "Is that true? Did you deliberately manipulate the system to cancel Mr. Hayes' confirmed booking?" Brenda, reduced to a trembling mess, could only stare blankly ahead, tears streaming down her face, muttering incoherent, pathetic pleas for mercy. Her body language, her utter breakdown, was an undeniable admission of guilt, a public confession in her silence. She was utterly undone. Thompson, visibly regaining a fraction of his voice, stammered, his words thick with desperation and a desperate need to contain the burgeoning crisis. "Mr. Hayes, I am deeply, profoundly sorry. This is unacceptable. This is an egregious breach of trust, an outright act of sabotage and discrimination by one of our employees. She will be dealt with immediately." He then turned to Brenda, his voice rising in an almost guttural roar, shaking with a mixture of rage and corporate fear. "Brenda, you are fired. Effective immediately. Get out of my sight." Brenda burst into desperate sobs, pleading for her job, for her future, for any shred of leniency, but two stern-faced security guards, who seemed to materialize out of nowhere, quietly and efficiently escorted her out of the room, her cries fading into the hushed corridor. Her face, tear-streaked and distorted by raw anguish, was a picture of utter despair and the complete, shattering realization of her downfall. She had tried to humiliate David, to assert her petty power, and in doing so, had utterly destroyed herself, her own life now in shambles, a cautionary tale of unchecked prejudice. But David wasn't finished. He let Brenda's pathetic exit hang in the air for a moment, then turned his gaze back to Thompson, his voice firm, leaving no room for negotiation. "And Mr. Miller," he stated, his voice cutting through the lingering shock like a finely honed blade. "His involvement in this direct act of corporate sabotage is now undeniable. This was not just personal prejudice on the part of an employee. It was a calculated attempt to disrupt a multi-billion-dollar business deal through corporate espionage. That, Mr. Thompson, is a federal offense, and it has severe legal ramifications. Apex Innovations will be pursuing every legal avenue available, not just against Ms. Brenda, but explicitly against Mr. Miller and Horizon Labs, unless your airline takes immediate, public, and decisive action against him as well. The footage proves his complicity beyond any doubt." David Thompson scrambled for his phone, his hands trembling slightly, the immense weight of the crisis pressing down on him. He immediately called Kevin Miller, putting the call on speakerphone so everyone in the room could hear the unfolding disaster. Miller's voice, initially confident and dismissive, quickly descended into a stammering, terrified denial as Thompson, his voice now regaining its CEO authority, but laced with a chilling fury, laid out the irrefutable evidence and the dire consequences. "Miller!" Thompson roared into the phone, his voice shaking with a mixture of rage and desperate corporate self-preservation. "All contracts with Horizon Labs are hereby terminated, effective immediately. Furthermore, I promise you, this airline will fully assist Mr. Hayes in every possible legal action against you and your company. You will be held accountable for this corporate sabotage and the grave damage you've caused. Your reputation and your company's future are over. Kevin Miller's broken, whimpering protests and frantic pleas were barely audible as Thompson slammed the phone down, severing the connection and, symbolically, Kevin's career. Kevin Miller, the smug, arrogant rival, the quintessential antagonist type A, had collapsed, his empire of deceit and corporate ruthlessness crumbling spectacularly around him. His attempt to subtly undermine David had, instead, led to his own spectacular, public, and utterly deserved downfall, a vivid example of poetic justice. The remaining executives in the room, initially skeptical, defensive, and even subtly hostile, now looked at David Hayes with a profound mixture of awe, newfound respect, and a dawning, almost fearful understanding of his true power. Their faces, once guarded and unyielding, now openly reflected admiration, even a hint of profound trepidation. They realized he was not just a successful CEO, but a formidable opponent, a man of unwavering principle who held the line against injustice, wielding evidence and strategic foresight with surgical precision. The Fanong Quan Hung Goi Chung Kien, the collective gasp, the terrified silence, the dawning respect, was a powerful, silent affirmation of David's victory, a societal vindication that resonated deeply within the corporate microcosm of the boardroom. He had not merely won a battle, he had redefined the terms of engagement, proving that integrity, meticulous preparation, and quiet strength could dismantle even the most entrenched prejudice and the most insidious corporate malice. The legend had not just returned, it had roared to life, unmistakable and undeniable, leaving an indelible mark on everyone who witnessed its resurgence, forever altering their perception of power and justice. The sudden quiet that descended upon the executive boardroom, after the dramatic exit of Brenda and the thundering verbal assault on Kevin Miller, was more profound than any silence before it. It was the hush of absolute shock, of shattered illusions, and of undeniable defeat for those who had underestimated David Hayes. Brenda, the once haughty airline attendant, her pleas reduced to pathetic, incoherent sobs, was unceremoniously escorted out of the room by security. Her perfectly coiffed hair now disheveled, her face streaked with tears and a sickening realization. Her ignominious departure sealed her fate. Her career, built on a shaky foundation of prejudice and the petty satisfaction of wielding trivial power, was not just ended, it was utterly demolished. She would find herself swiftly blacklisted from the entire airline industry, a professional pariah among her peers, her actions serving as a stark, cautionary tale to others who might dare to wield their positions with similar disdain or discriminatory intent. Her public downfall was swift, absolute, and painfully deserved, a fitting consequence for her arrogance and deeply ingrained harmful biases. On the speakerphone, Kevin Miller's desperate, stammering protests were abruptly, mercilessly cut short as David Thompson, the airline CEO, disconnected the call with a furious, resolute slam. Thompson, his face still pale but now hardened with a cold corporate resolve, looked at the other executives around the table. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sharp, almost painful intake of breath from Robert Sterling. "Effective immediately," Thompson declared, his voice ringing with a newfound steely authority that banished all previous hesitation. "All existing contracts with Horizon Labs are terminated. Furthermore, I want our legal team to begin preparing a full dossier of cooperation. This airline will fully cooperate with Mr. Hayes and Apex Innovations in any and all legal actions they deem necessary against Mr. Miller and his company for corporate sabotage and discrimination. We will assist in every possible way to ensure he faces the full weight of the law." The news would hit the industry like a seismic event, sending shockwaves through the tightly knit world of corporate partnerships and rivalries. Kevin Miller, the cunning, ruthless rival, the quintessential antagonist, Type A, saw his carefully constructed empire crumble in real time. His calculated malice, his arrogant attempt to undermine David Hayes, had backfired spectacularly, leading directly and unequivocally to his own professional ruin and severe legal repercussions that threatened to strip him of everything he had built. He would lose not just his company and its lucrative contracts, but his reputation, his standing in the cutthroat world of tech, and likely a significant portion of his personal fortune in the ensuing lawsuits. He would become a cautionary tale, a pariah in his own right, a vivid illustration of how hubris and prejudice could lead to utter annihilation. Meanwhile, David Hayes, having delivered his decisive blow with surgical precision, felt a deep, cleansing sense of vindication wash over him. It wasn't triumph in the traditional outward sense, no jubilant cheer or fist pump, no public celebration. It was a calm, profound satisfaction, a quiet peace that settled deep within his core, the deep-seated contentment of justice meticulously served. David Thompson, now utterly humbled and visibly shaken by the sheer scale of the crisis David had unveiled, slowly turned to David, his apology sincere, deeply felt, and devoid of any corporate pretense. "Mr. Hayes," he began, his voice laced with genuine remorse, a stark contrast to his earlier defensiveness. "There are no words to express our profound regret for what you experienced today. This is inexcusable. It is a stain on our company's values, and on behalf of the entire airline, I offer our deepest, most sincere apologies. We failed you, and we will take immediate, drastic steps to rectify this." Thompson, desperate to repair the damage and prevent a PR nightmare of unprecedented proportions that could cripple his airline, extended an olive branch, not merely a superficial one, but one of genuine, substantial opportunity. "We would be incredibly honored, Mr. Hayes," he continued, his voice earnest, "if you would consider joining our advisory board. We desperately need your insight, your perspective, your unwavering commitment to fairness, to ensure such prejudice never again taints our service, never again infiltrates our ranks. And beyond that, as a gesture of our commitment to change and to preventing any recurrence, we would like to offer Apex Innovations a comprehensive, long-term strategic partnership, beginning with a multi-year, multi-million-dollar contract for your cutting-edge AI-powered training software. We want to completely overhaul our employee sensitivity and customer service protocols, leveraging your expertise to build a truly inclusive environment from the ground up." He was offering not just atonement, but a future-proof solution, an acknowledgement of David's unparalleled expertise. David listened patiently, his expression thoughtful, a subtle shift in his gaze indicating deep consideration. He politely, but firmly, declined the advisory board position, recognizing it as a token gesture, a symbolic appeasement that wouldn't truly address the systemic issues. However, the offer for a strategic partnership, particularly one explicitly focused on using Apex Innovations' advanced technology to proactively identify and combat discrimination within the sprawling airline structure, resonated deeply with his personal mission, his core values. He saw a tangible, unparalleled chance to turn a deeply personal affront into a broad, systemic change, to implement real solutions rather than mere apologies. He envisioned Apex Innovations' AI as a powerful tool to detect implicit biases, to train employees in cultural competency, and to ensure equitable treatment for every passenger, regardless of their appearance or perceived status. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Thompson," David responded, his tone firm but measured, conveying both acceptance and a clear set of conditions. "While I won't join the advisory board, I am willing to oversee the implementation of Apex Innovation software. This is not about retribution. It's about ensuring that no one else has to endure what I did today. It's about building a system that fosters genuine respect and understanding, driven by data and accountability. We can create that system together." Thompson, visibly relieved and immensely impressed by David's pragmatism and commitment to actionable solutions, nodded enthusiastically, a genuine light of hope appearing in his eyes. This was more than a significant new opportunity for David. It was a profound vindication, leveraging his influence and his company's groundbreaking technology to initiate tangible, lasting, positive change across an entire, highly influential industry. The multi-billion-dollar London deal, now officially signed with a renewed sense of profound purpose and a deeper meaning, felt even more significant, a powerful testament to the fact that justice and prosperity could, and should, go hand in hand. Hours later, high above the churning, vast expanse of the Atlantic Ocean, the soft, almost imperceptible hum of David's state-of-the-art private jet was the only sound in the plush, expansive cabin. Sarah, his indispensable assistant, sat across from him, her posture finally relaxed, a laptop resting on her knees as she reviewed the finalized London contract, its digital signature now securing Apex Innovations' monumental leap forward. The profound relief in her posture was palpable, a mirror to David's own internal calm. "You really did it, David," Sarah said, a quiet awe in her voice that transcended mere professional admiration. "You took what could have been a colossal humiliation, a significant business risk, a potential career setback, and you transformed it into a monumental, industry-altering victory. I've never, in all my years, seen anyone accomplish something so profound, so utterly decisive, from such a disadvantaged position." David gazed out at the endless, ethereal expanse of clouds stretching to the horizon, a contemplative look etched on his face. The setting sun painted the sky in hues of fiery orange and soft violet, a breathtaking canvas of serene beauty. "It wasn't just a victory, Sarah," he responded, his voice soft, reflective, yet imbued with an underlying strength. "It was a stark, undeniable reminder that we must never, ever back down from injustice, no matter how subtle or overt. It's about protecting our own dignity, yes, but more importantly, it's about paving the way for those who come after us. It's about ensuring that a young black man or woman, or indeed anyone from any marginalized background, doesn't get denied what they've earned, doesn't get mistreated, simply because someone in a position of power has a preconceived notion about who they are or where they belong. It's about dismantling those notions, brick by brick." He paused, then added, his gaze returning to the cabin, meeting Sarah's earnest eyes. "Every step of my journey, from the humble beginning symbolized by this worn-out watch on my wrist, to the scar near my temple that marks my skin, has been about overcoming obstacles, about rising from difficult circumstances. Today was just another battle in a much larger, ongoing war for equity and respect. But it's a war we must keep fighting, diligently, strategically, not just for ourselves, but for the principle of justice itself, for the fundamental right of every individual to be treated with dignity." He recognized, with a profound sense of clarity, that the struggle for fairness, far from being a burden, was an essential, defining part of his own growth, a continuous affirmation of his identity and his purpose in the world. The quiet man who had entered the airport that morning, facing prejudice and potential ruin, was irrevocably transformed, not by anger or resentment, but by the unwavering power of his own integrity, his strategic brilliance, and his ultimate, undeniable influence. He had found his new calm, a profound sense of peace born from decisive action and a greater purpose. The old, worn silver locket, hidden beneath his shirt, now felt less like a relic of a buried past, and more like a promise of a future yet to unfold. A future he was now powerfully equipped to shape. 3 years later, the name David Hayes resonated far beyond the confines of the tech industry. Apex Innovations, under his visionary and increasingly influential leadership, had expanded into a truly global empire, not merely dominating the software market but also pioneering cutting-edge AI solutions for incredibly diverse industries, including aviation, healthcare, education, and even environmental conservation. David, despite his immense, almost unimaginable wealth and the burgeoning scale of his influence, remained remarkably true to his understated roots. His penthouse, still minimalist in its design, served as a quiet sanctuary from the constant global clamor that now accompanied his every move. He still made his own coffee each morning, still woke before dawn for his solitary, disciplined workouts, and still preferred the comfort of unbranded casual clothes when not in a high-stakes boardroom or delivering a keynote address. But the impact of his life, once a quiet ripple, had amplified exponentially, becoming a powerful wave of change that touched countless lives. His accumulated wealth, once primarily a means of personal security and financial independence, had fundamentally transformed into a powerful engine for broad, systemic societal change. David established the Hayes Equity Fund, a colossal non-profit philanthropic arm directly funded by Apex Innovations' unprecedented success. The fund was dedicated to two primary interconnected missions. First, investing in and nurturing small businesses founded by minority entrepreneurs, providing crucial seed capital, strategic mentorship, and invaluable networking opportunities where traditional financial avenues often failed to reach. And second, financing large-scale legal projects specifically aimed at combating systemic discrimination across various sectors of society. He became, almost inadvertently, a global icon of justice and equality, a living testament to the profound power of leveraging one's platform and resources for significant social good. His quiet resistance, sparked by a singular act of prejudice, had blossomed into a mighty, undeniable movement, inspiring countless others to seek fairness and challenge injustice. David dedicated a significant, often unpublicized portion of his time to actively paying it forward. He regularly delivered captivating keynote speeches at prestigious universities, international conferences, and community forums, drawing immense crowds eager to hear his insights. He would recount, with compelling honesty, his journey from humble beginnings to global influence, emphasizing the critical importance of resilience, integrity, and unwavering self-belief in the face of adversity. He wasn't just a speaker, he was a mentor, a guide, a beacon. He mentored countless young students and aspiring entrepreneurs, particularly those from disadvantaged backgrounds who faced similar barriers to those he had once overcome. He shared not just shrewd business acumen and technological foresight, but invaluable life lessons on perseverance, the subtle art of negotiation, and the enduring power of ethical leadership. The story of the Black CEO denied a first-class seat had, over these 3 years, transcended mere news or anecdote. It had become an urban legend, a widely shared parable of injustice overcome, a powerful, inspiring narrative that resonated deeply with anyone who had ever faced adversity, discrimination, or simply felt undervalued. He became a trusted advisor, a quiet force, a powerful source of hope for a new generation eager to carve their own paths in a world still grappling with inequities. One quiet evening, as the last sliver of the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in breathtaking hues of fiery orange, soft rose, and deep violet, David sat alone in the spacious, exquisitely appointed cabin of his private jet. The aircraft soared silently through the vast, inky expanse of the night sky, its twin engines humming a barely perceptible lullaby. He was en route to an international summit where he was scheduled to deliver the opening address on the critical importance of equity in emerging technologies. He gazed out the panoramic window, watching the distant stars shimmer like scattered diamonds against the velvet blackness, a profound sense of peace settling over him. On his left wrist, the old unbranded wristwatch remained, its worn face a constant tactile connection to his humble beginnings, a physical reminder of the journey he had traversed. Its very simplicity spoke volumes of a life lived by principles, not possessions. Occasionally, as he shifted his hand, the ambient, soft light from the cabin would catch the subtle, almost hidden outline of the scar near his left temple, and the glint of the old, worn silver locket beneath his shirt, its surface smoothed by years of touch. These were his private symbols, marks of the fires he had survived, the countless times he had risen from ashes, stronger and more purposeful. He smiled faintly, a profound, contented smile that reached his eyes, crinkling the corners just so. He was no longer just the man who had been unjustly scorned at an airport check-in counter. He was a living legend, a global force for positive change, a guiding light for the oppressed, and an undeniable testament to the enduring power of resilience, strategic foresight, and unwavering justice. The profound indignity he had faced years ago, far from breaking him or fostering bitterness, had been the crucible that forged his ultimate purpose, leading him not just to unprecedented personal success and financial prosperity, but to a profound, wide-reaching, and impactful legacy. He had found his second spring, a season not merely of personal affluence and professional triumph, but of boundless influence, widespread inspiration, and an unwavering, deep-seated commitment to shaping a more just and equitable world for all. His story, a testament to quiet strength, the dismantling of prejudice, and ultimate triumph over adversity, would continue to inspire, forever etched into the annals of progress, a powerful narrative for generations to come. If this story stirred your heart, if it reminds you that courage can alter destinies and that light always finds a path even in the deepest darkness, please leave a comment. Share this story with those who need inspiration. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell to never miss our upcoming narratives that delve into the profound human spirit and the power of unseen heroes. Thank you for joining the journey.